David, there's a question I've always wanted to ask you, and that is how much liability coverage is enough?
Boy, that is, that is I like that question. And I have several examples that I give to people. So, for example, there's a case that I know about out there that this guy was at a hotel. He got inebriated. He fell off the balcony because the railing wasn't high enough. It was defective, wasn't the right height. And so he sues for this tragic damages that he suffered, injuries that he suffered from this fall. And the insurance company for the hotel said, and it could have been a condominium association just as easily, right? That's why it's relevant. And so the carrier said, you were drunk. So they didn't settle. They defended this case, went to trial. And what the trial determined was, guess what? It's legal to be intoxicated in your own home. And the hotel room was his own home for that purposes. So you can't say that it happened because he was drunk, because he's entitled to be drunk. He's entitled to be drunk with you having the right size railing $25 million later. Wow. And there's this case I just sent Tim recently where this little girl was hit by a tree at this condominium association, and she's okay. She'll go to college, but she suffered traumatic injuries initially, $500,000 in medical expenses, and there was a $14 million settlement out of that case. And that they settled for $14 million because they were potentially looking at more than that if it went to trial.
And that's just a tree limb.
That was a tree. A whole eucalyptus tree fell on her.
It's not like they had a pool, which is an attractive nuisance, or a playground or something, just a tree limb.
So, I'm dealing with this now, and I was actually talking to Tim about this, where my own association, we have a guy that wants us to put an AED in. And I'm strongly against the association putting an AED in because, not that it isn't needed, although we haven't needed one. Defibrillator. Right. And this guy's brother almost died, and he was saved at some association in San Diego. That association, in their newspaper article, said they had used the defibrillator 4 times in the last 8 years. My association's never needed one in the 25 years I've been there.
You guys have better hearts over there.
I guess so. Yeah. So the point is that they're asking me how much insurance we should have. And I'm thinking with these cases I told you about, $25 million for somebody that, if you got some executive that's, business guy, makes a lot of money, and he's at the club and he dies and he claims I would have lived had the defibrillator worked. Oh, and by the way, we had a guy from a major company, the defibrillator company, come out to speak to us. And he said, I just went to this other association that we all know in this room, and really well-managed association. And all 3 of the defibrillators did not have the pads in them. Someone had taken the pads from all 3 defibrillators. So they were rendered useless. And if they had needed one,
they could have killed somebody, and then more liability.
So if you take on the responsibility of having an AED, a defibrillator, and it doesn't work, the potential liability is somebody dies and they say, I would have lived, but had the defibrillator worked.
There's an expectation of...
So the answer is how much can you afford is the answer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's particularly in California, because you just never know what a jury's going to award.
What's the maximum amount of liability coverage with umbrella policies can an association get?
Oh, we see $50, $75, $100 million.
The highest one that we have a few associations with $100 million. I don't recall seeing any higher than that.
Because I think Farmers has a limit what they can write.
Well, a lot of carriers have a limit on what they write on the underlying policy, but then the umbrella is obviously oftentimes a completely different carrier that has the capacity, or sometimes a layered
risk
program.
Purchasing group.
Yeah. Okay.
The thing that's interesting, David, and playing devil's advocate with regard to your language, with regard to this particular issue, the AED issue, and I've thought some about this, is you could use that same argument for fire sprinklers, the same argument for fire extinguishers. Use that same argument for elevators going to the first floor when there's a fire. I mean, there are a number of life-saving safety devices out there that we rely on knowingly or unknowingly all the time. Seatbelts in cars.
But they're mandated by law. So if you're required to have it by law, then I'm saying, yeah, you got to have that by law. You're not required to have an AED at a typical condominium association.
And your argument is that the fact that it exists creates more liability than what it's worth.
Well, it's kind of like security cameras. You're not required to have security cameras. If you do have security cameras installed, then you set up an expectation of security for the owners. So then if that security camera isn't working and something happens, there's more liability, I would think, on the part of the association than had they not had
That's why, talking about security, for example, we are very strong in telling our clients, if I see that they say security, I say, do you really offer security? And do you have a gate monitor? That's not really security. So it's important to tell the owners that you don't provide security, because those cameras 9 times out of 10, probably 9.5 times out of 10 are not monitored. They're just surveillance cameras, and they're not going to stop a crime.
They're a deterrent.
So the answer is, and there's a guy, CAI, George Nowak.
George Nowak, yeah.
I was just reading an article in Common Ground, and he says, if the association is not obligated to do something, I say don't do it, because why take on that responsibility? Now you've taken on the responsibility. Once you have it, and just like this, my biggest fear was 2 things. One, that it would be tampered with or stolen and wouldn't be there when you wanted it, or that it wouldn't work when it wasn't being maintained properly. These days, the whole thing about AEDs and learning to use them, they're so easy. They walk you right through it. But here's this guy comes to talk to us, and he says, and he just off the cuff, not even prompted, he says, I went to this large association. He says he checks the 3 defibrillators, and all 3, not one, but all 3 did not have the pads. That's my fear. And so I checked on, you can get locking boxes, or you can get boxes with alarms on them. So I said to the guy, well, okay, you open it, the alarm goes off, really loud alarm. I said, oh, great. I said, how do you turn the alarm off? Oh, you close the door. So somebody goes in, opens the door, takes the defibrillator. They're $1,500, right?
Yeah.
Steals the defibrillator. And then when somebody goes to need it, it's not there. Somebody didn't, I didn't check this month.
Well, and
that's
if you hear an alarm going off outside your house, do you go outside?
No. I make sure it's my car.
You listen for your car, right?
Yeah. I check to see if it's my car. But the answer is that associations, my recommendation is don't take on something you're not obligated to take on. For example, safety. I'm teaching a course for CACM on disaster preparedness. And my thing is that I see associations, they say, oh, we're going to start this thing and we're going to put some medical supplies and food and blah, blah, blah. And then you talk to them a few years later and does anybody check it? No. And they check it and there's things missing. Somebody stole some stuff out of it. So I say, why are you doing that? Nothing says the association's obligated to do all these things. And you're doing it, and then somebody's going to say, it wasn't there when I needed it, and I relied on it. And sues for...
The moral of the story is you can be sued for anything. Why make yourself a bigger target?